Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about World of Warcraft Classic Fresh Season of Mastery and what to expect from it. Going to be talking about various aspects, leveling, faction balance, raiding, PvP even, with regards to Classic Fresh. So let's start with leveling. Blizzard has introduced a 40% experience bonus, quest experience bonus, in Classic Fresh, at least on the beta. They might increase it on the live version, maybe after a while, maybe even at launch, we don't know. Maybe there are some changes, some significant changes that are going to come in Classic Fresh when it actually launches. But for now, it's 40% extra quest experience. So whenever you complete a quest, you get 40% extra experience. It's more if you do elite quest or dungeon quest, so I don't know exactly how much more. But either way, this is to incentivize people to quest as opposed to just killing monsters, and that being the most efficient way to level. Is this going to change leveling? To a degree. I personally feel it's not going to be enough to really incentivize people to quest as opposed to doing dungeon spamming. I think when you're looking at things like Dead Mines or Scarlet Monastery or Zul'Farrak or even BRD or Lower Blackrock Spire, leveling through doing those dungeons, just killing mobs in those dungeons, is still going to be the most efficient way possible for a good group. Consider this situation. You might have a mob, a named mob in a quest that you need to kill at the end of a chain, or part of a chain at some point in the chain, or you have an item that you need to pick up from a mob, or just that's lying on the floor. You may go to that area and you may be waiting 3 minutes or more for that mob to respawn. Let's say you just enter there as someone's just killed it. You're going to be waiting 3+ minutes for it to respawn, and that's assuming you don't even have any kind of competition for a named mob. Now you add to this the fact that there's going to be a ton of people doing the same quests, killing the same mobs, worrying about the same objectives. That's going to slow you down even more than that. There are named mobs, there's elite mobs like Hagar and all that, where you're going to see queue lines being formed. Within the same time that you're waiting to kill a mob in one of these areas, not necessarily the early areas, right, but later on, within the same time, you could do an entire Scarlet Monastery Cathedral run. You can do it in less than 10 minutes, or thereabouts, anyway. You don't kill the bosses, you don't worry about killing bosses, you worry about killing mobs, and you're going to get more experience, easily more experience, than you would if you're bothering with questing. That's something Blizzard should have tackled. They have improved the amount of experience you're gaining from questing, but it's not going to be enough to compete with that. And I can see mages, hunters, warlocks, they're going to level very quickly, but not necessarily for questing. It is a benefit what they've done, but it isn't enough to end the harmful, if you will, leveling practices that people did adopt for Classic and for TBC Classic. It's not going to be enough. Dungeon leveling is still going to be a thing, though of course boosting is not, because they've nerfed the amount of experience people get from having a very high level player in their group. But making a group of like-minded players is still going to be the most efficient way to level, and just doing dungeons over and over and again. Though you might also have a case of some dungeon quests at the very least, or maybe a full quest run of dungeons is going to be worth it. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about spending hours and hours and hours on end, it's going to be more efficient and better to just level through dungeons with a solid dungeon group. Though how many of these dungeon groups you're going to see before launch, like how many groups you're going to see, that's a different discussion. One of the concerns I do have with Classic Fresh is that you're not really seeing a lot of hardcore guilds lining up to play Classic Fresh when it launches, and that might create some issues. So I do have some concerns. That's actually a major concern that I personally do have with regards to Classic Fresh. You could say, oh, the game doesn't necessarily need those guilds to thrive, to which I reply, kind of does, or at least it needs guilds. I'm looking right now at Classic Fresh. What I'm worried about is not just hardcore guilds, it's guilds in general. And that's a concern as far as I see it, because it could be a major problem for the health of the community in Classic Fresh. So that's the second thing I want to mention in this video, is what Blizzard has done they've done positive steps. They've done things that are needed. They've done the right things. They've moved in the right direction, but it hasn't created the necessary reaction for it to have a thriving community of players, as I see it right now. And I could be wrong. It might end up it might end up being the case that you have an enormous number of people trying out Classic Fresh, even if that hasn't been stated just yet. But the lack of guilds, the lack of organization in guilds, and the short period of time that they've given us is going to all cause issues. And maybe Blizzard is aware of this, maybe they're not aware of this, but it is something to be worried about. It's something to look at, and something to take note of, because it might end up hurting the game in a fairly significant way. So the first two things to mention there. Then let's talk about raiding. World buffs have been removed completely from the game. So no world buffs, and raid bosses and trash, I believe, are buffed. The version I tested personally was the one which is the double HP, but since then they've stated that they're going to add new mechanics. I've seen some of that like Barongeddon, more people exploding with the bomb or things like that. So the mechanics have been changed. Things are going to be more difficult to deal with. No world buffs. And you'd say, oh, people did most of this content, if not all this content, on the beta. Right, sure. And some pugs did pretty well on the beta. But you got to keep in mind, when we're looking at Molten Core in the beta, people had flasks, they had the full bags of consumables. Sure, they didn't have the best enchants, not necessarily the best gear, but they had better gear than the vast majority of people will have when they're going into Molten Core. They had epic weapons on warriors and rogues, for crying out loud, or at least warriors. That is obviously not very realistic in any way, shape or form. And we were considerably more powerful with the gear we were given than many people in many guilds, such as they are, will be when they're jumping into multi-core. The point I'm making here, raiding is going to be more difficult. It's not going to be a cakewalk. People are going to have to put effort. And with the removal of world buffs, as well as the buffing to bosses, you're going to see changes in the raiding meta. You're not going to see a situation where 15, 20 DPS warriors is going to be the meta. You're going to see a situation where rogues are more valued. Warlocks are more valued. Mages, casters in general, a caster raid is going to do better in Classic Fresh than it did in Classic or vanilla in general. So that's going to become more or less the norm. I'd say a more balanced raid setup is what we're headed towards with Classic Fresh, and we're also headed towards a situation where a lot of tanks are going to be deep protection. Fury Prom may be viable after a certain point, like say Blackwing Lair gear, or maybe AQ gear, where it becomes viable, but especially on the Alliance because of the extra HP provided by Kings, by Blessing of Kings. But the issue with Fury Prot isn't going to be just a question of, oh, can you survive the hits? Okay, you can survive the hits, but can healers keep you up without running out of mana? Because with the fights longer, healers are going to have to concern themselves with mana they're going to have to concern themselves with when mana far more than they did in Classic. So healers running out of mana may be a genuine issue that you may have to deal with in Classic, and you have to worry about that as a tank when it comes to your gearing and your spec. So those are things to worry about. Now, the rating changes are going to favor the Alliance. Kings is going to be important. Fear Ward going to be more important. Blessing of Salvation going to be very important. I'd say the Alliance is going to end up ahead of the Horde when we're talking about faction balance. But of course, Horde is very, very popular, and it's going to be difficult to break that situation where a lot of people are playing Horde just because they've gotten used to playing Horde. I don't think that's necessarily going to change between the Horde and Alliance, but I do think Alliance is going to end up in a far stronger position. Kings, Salvation, Fear Ward, and just in general, really, the Alliance has a far better leveling path, especially in their early zones, as far as I see it. Like the quests that they're given and the routes you have are better, at least in the 120, 130 area. After that, things may change, but early on, they're in a far better position questing-wise, not necessarily leveling one, killing mobs wise. I mean, the Horde being close to Scarlet Monastery, being far closer, far easier for them to access that is an advantage for the Horde, but the Alliance does have an advantage at least until level 30, and then things may change, especially with things like the Hinterlands, Scarlet Monastery, and all that. So it's not necessarily given, but those early levels are very important for any faction, because the experience you get in those early levels is the one that's going to determine how many people are going to play, how many people are going to stick around. You know, it's one thing to quit when you're, say, level 10 and say, oh, this is not for me. It's another thing to level up to 30 and then quit. That's a different situation. And this brings me to PvP. I think PvP is going to be more of the same of what we've seen. More of the same of what we've seen so far in Classic, in Vanilla in general. There might be a change with Alterac Valley, especially if they change the map, if they bring, say, the Burn Crusade map into Classic Fresh. If they do that, maybe the reinforcement system. We haven't really heard all that much about PvP. The most they've talked about is the honor change. You're going to get the honor faster. You're going to be able to rank up faster, rather, not necessarily gain honor faster, but you're going to be able to rank up in PvP faster than you were able to in Classic. So that's a welcome development. How faction balance is going to end up being is going to depend on faction numbers at the end of the day, and how seriously the Alliance are going to take it this time around. Things were not so horribly imbalanced between the Horde and Alliance the first time around, in terms of population, that is, but the Horde ended up being dominating in PvP. Now, sure, some of it is down to the Alterac Valley layout and all that, but it's not really just that. It's also the attitude that a lot of Alliance players had and a lot of Alliance guilds had in Classic. We'll see if any of that changes in Classic Fresh. I certainly hope we avoid a situation similar to what in a Classic, with the Horde just dominating in AV and the Alliance having just losing, but the Horde having very long queues. I wonder if they're going to bring the same faction queues in Classic Fresh, if that ends up the case again. Maybe not. We'll see. Right, there's a lot of things up in the air with Classic Fresh right now, and I really wish Blizzard had put more time in development. I think, and I'll bring this up as a final point, I think that we're in for a period of time, especially the first few months, first few weeks even, where Blizzard is going to implement more and more changes in Classic Fresh, because the way I'm seeing it, it's unfinished. The work that they've done is not finished. They have more stuff to do. They're just rushing a release because, well, they're not doing so well as a company. They're desperate. They want to win. And so we're getting a release earlier than we should. And what that means is we're likely going to see some major changes even after launch, as Blizzard keeps improving on Classic Fresh, which is in areas that they've said that they're already going to improve on. So they're going to be dealing with power leveling, with boosting. We'll see if they deal with gold selling. They've done some changes. We'll see what shape of the economy is going to have. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done all the same. Questine here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more. Classic Fresh launches in less than a week, or in just over a week, sorry. It just launches in just over a week, and I am looking forward to seeing how it plays out. Though I gotta admit, I'm not necessarily the most optimistic guy, so hey, we'll see.